Dear God, thank you for an opportunity in this week to take a moment to catch our breath, to consider what we have and who we are in a fresh way. Amen. It's a fresh parable. It's not an easy one. It tells us this morning about a man who entrusts tremendous amounts of money to three other people. But the question arises, is this guy a generous man or a hard or harsh man? Not all those who get the privilege of managing his money agree about this. Put me in mind of a sketch the British comedian Rowan Atkinson did some years ago. Remember, he was Mr. Bean, but he did other things too. The piece he did is called The Reading of the Will. And so a judge is speaking. We are here to read the last will and testament of Franklin Leo Hempstead. To my nephew Ralph, the most bone-idle, latitudinous little toad I have ever known, I leave my yacht, the one I used to play with in the tub when I was 2. To my niece Winifred, whom I always promised to mention in my will, hello. To my other niece Mary Beth, whom I have always considered spoiled beyond imagining, I leave the contents of my safe deposit box, the key to which is hidden under a stone somewhere in Canada. And finally, to my dear wife, I leave the remainder of my estate on the condition that within 6 months of this reading, she meets and marries the Ayatollah Khomeini. Yeah. You might want to share this over Thanksgiving dinner. Now to the gospel. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his servants and entrusted his property to them, and just when the 3 servants needed the master to give them advice on how to invest that money, he disappears. Servant number 1 and number 2 have great results with what's lent them. The problem arises, of course, with servant number 3. He refuses to put his share of the money in the stock market and is lambasted for it. Well, maybe he's wary, having seen the market increase since the last recession, but wondering still when the next recession might finally arrive. He's careful. The guy has been given a bundle of money, in fact, 15 years' wages by one estimate, and this money, which he has stuffed away in a large sack, he decides to bury in his backyard, maybe putting a bush over it to kind of disguise it, make it look natural. Finally, the master returns. The first servant comes forward and says, "You gave me the equivalent of 75 years of wages. I doubled it." "Well done, good and faithful servant," says the master. "You were faithful over a little. I will now set you over much." Second servant comes, shows he's also had a doubling of the investment. And once again, the master says, "Well done." And then comes number 3, who is proud of himself, proud to have acted conservatively. He has risked not $1 and is glad to be returning every penny given him. He also says something about the master being a harsh man, reaping where he did not sow, but mostly he's just proud to be giving the money back, every penny of it. And the master replies, "You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I was hard. You should have at least put my money in the bank so I could have had the interest." So he says, "Take all the little wretch's money and give it to the other 2, or maybe just the top 1. Because to those who have, more will be given, and from those who have little, even that will be taken away." Some Christian teaching this is, right? The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Where's the grace in this story? Well, the truth is that read in a particular way, grace can be said to permeate the story from actually the first sentence. The master's going away on a journey, and he summons his 3 servants, and he gives them not some of what he has, he gives them everything. And who is really at risk here? It's the master who makes himself absolutely vulnerable to the whims of the grantees of his trust. This is either an example of supreme grace or supreme foolishness, right? Note that in this which happens to be Matthew's version of the story, Jesus tells this parable toward the end of his life, just before he begins his journey to a place called Calvary to offer his everything, right? What Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg called the last full measure of devotion. So this amounts to being a story of extravagance told by one of the most extravagant people who ever lived. Jesus is the one who defined waste not as risking everything, but as being too careful. He is remembered to have said, quote, "Greater love hath no one than that he lay down his life for his friends." But the 3rd servant in today's parable doesn't get that. He misses the grace totally. He is given all that money, and the only thing he becomes more acquainted with because of it is the dirt in his own backyard. It doesn't stretch him one bit. All he has to show for his master's investment in him is a hole in the ground. He might as well be standing over his own grave, which, in a way, he is. So the parable as it stands says, this is your life, God's supreme gift to you. What are you doing with it? Now, I note that we're looking at this just a week after Veterans Day. And the whole thing makes me think of the film Saving Private Ryan. So let me remind you of that story. In that movie, set during World War II, the sole surviving son in a family of 4 boys is rescued at the order of General George C. Marshall, no less. The general orders a platoon to find him. He's deployed somewhere in France. And to bring him home to his mother so she'll have at least one son, which they do, but at a very heavy price. The death of the Tom Hanks character, Captain John Miller, who's in charge of the rescue. At films, and Private Ryan, now a senior citizen, bends down over the grave of Captain Miller there at Normandy. And he says the following to the marble cross over Captain Miller's grave. "To be honest with you, I wasn't sure how I'd feel coming back here. Every day I think about what you said to me that day on the bridge where you died, that I'd have to earn it, earn what you sacrificed for me. I have tried to live my life the best I could. I hope that was enough. I hope that at least in your eyes I have earned what all you have done for me." Now that little speech brings him to his knees. How can any life measure up to a sacrifice that great? And then Private Ryan's wife walks up and reads the name on the stone. And her husband says to her, tell me I have led a good life." "What?" she says incredulously. "Tell me I am a good man," he says. Have we lived good lives, right? Are we good people? Let me put it this way. Who sacrificed what so that we could be here, safe and warm? I say this because if you look back far enough, you will find someone, maybe even a half dozen people, I don't know, who sacrificed their lives and livelihoods for you. Someone who gave up something, a career, a special relationship, maybe even their own life. It is true of every one of us. Secondly, what in fact is the measure of a good life anyway? That we're successes? By what measure? I mean, what does success or failure mean in a crazy world like ours, right? Success often comes by luck, sheer luck. And failure? Failure, as I say from time to time, quoting Mother Teresa, is, quote, nothing but the kiss of Jesus. Your failures are often what lead you to your truest happiness. One can spend a lifetime, unpacking the meaning of that phrase, and some people do. Looking closely at the parable, what was the nature of the failure of the steward, right? It wasn't that he'd done anything evil. He'd just been too careful, right? He'd been fearful of the master, fearful maybe of life itself. And here is the verdict on that kind of life. Quote, not to take possession of your life's plan is to let your existence be an accident. That's by Irvin Yalom. Not to take possession of your life's plan is to let your existence be an accident. Well, sometimes failure knocks us down for a while, but in most cases we can get up again. The real danger comes when we get stuck somewhere short of really living, right? Allow me to give you one more example from World War II this morning. In the spring of 1984, Tom Brokaw went to the beaches of Normandy to prepare an NBC documentary on the 40th anniversary of D-Day. He did his homework. He researched the military planning, the number of men, ships, airplanes, and weapons, the German defenses, the names of the French villages. What he was not prepared for, he said, was the way the experience would affect him emotionally. Remember, he ended up writing that book, The Greatest Generation. Well, on his first day at Normandy, he met two veterans of D-Day, two men who had served in the Army's 1st Regiment. One of them won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and the other had lost a leg. Brokaw asked them what happened there all those years before. And they said they were in the invasion's first wave. They were together in a landing craft a few dozen yards off the beach when that big metal ramp went down in front of them, in front of their whole platoon. Immediately, the lieutenant and master sergeant leading them were cut down. That left 24 men in the craft, totally leaderless. These two jumped over the side, which they were told explicitly not to do, but they made it to the beach. And they hunkered down behind a tank trap. And there they sat for over an hour, not knowing what in the world to do. Eventually, a U.S. Army colonel came loping along the beach as if he were a tourist. He bent down to speak to them and said, "Fellas, there are only two kinds of men on this beach, the dead and those about to be dead. You've got to keep moving forward. You've got to keep moving forward. You've got to invest your talents, large or small." I'm thinking this moment of a woman who married a very careful man who, like her Depression-era father, never took any risks at all in his life. Her husband once said to her, "If one of us should die, I would go back and live with my mother in Seattle." That's just how he said it. What is success? And what is failure after all? Nothing that we thought they were until we, really experience them, right? We will never know the extent or the full effect of the good we do on this earth. God may bless even the smallest thing that we have done or said, and God may use and bless even our failures, even the big ones. Remember, not to take possession of your life plan is to let your existence be an accident. The Apostle Paul once wrote the following about this kind of initiative. He said, "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." And then he adds a curious addendum to that. "For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for God's good pleasure." There's an interesting tension there, I think. We're to show complete initiative as if everything depends on us. But then, knowing how complex life is, Paul suggests that we should take heart, knowing that we are not alone. God is at work within us, helping us find the will, the wit, the energy to do the things we're born to do. The late Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, once offered the following word of advice: live as if you were living a second time and as though you had squandered the first. This is the word of wisdom for that third steward, right? Live as if you were living a second time and as though you had squandered the first. That can be so freeing if you really take that to heart. Let me close with a poem by Mary Oliver's, from whom I borrowed the language to fashion the title of this sermon. The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do, and you began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles, "Mend my life." Each voice cried that, but you didn't stop. No, you knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which was slowly recognized by you as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save. Amen.